Hi, this is Braden Holtby.
Hey, this is Tanner the Bulldozer Bozer.
Hi, this is Brian Burke from Toronto, Ontario.
This is Daryl Sutter.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carly Agro from Sportsnet Central.
This is Jay Onright.
This is Quick Dick coming to you from Tofnell, Saskatchewan.
Hey, everybody. My name is Theo Fleury.
This is Kelly Rudy.
This is Corey Cross.
This is Wade Redden.
This is Jordan Tutu.
My name is Jim Pattison.
Hey, it's Ron McLean, Hockey Night in Canada and Rogers Hometown Hockey, and welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Let's get on to your T-Bar 1 Tale of the Tape. Originally from Sydney, Nova Scotia, he initially went to school to become a doctor but found his way to the campus radio station. In 1974, he started full-time with the CBC. From 79 to 89, he was in Winnipeg as anchor of CBWT's 24-hour sports show. In 89, he was hired by Hockey Night in Canada, where he's worked ever since. 2003, he won a Gemini Award for Best Host or Interviewer in a Sports Program. He's now covered well over 10 Olympic Games. You can find him on Saturday nights co-hosting a cult favorite After Hours, which is broadcast after the late game on Hockey Night in Canada. I'm talking about Scott Oake. So buckle up. Here we go.
Hi, this is Scott Oake. Welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Scott Oake. First off, thanks for taking some time out of, your busy schedule, but you're stuck in the bubble, so maybe not that busy of a schedule.
Not so busy right now, Sean. This is day 2 of my 4-day quarantine for me before I'm allowed to move around in the bubble for the NHL playoffs here in Edmonton. It's been a bit of a process, but look, I'm here in the luxurious JW Marriott, and I can get through the 4 days with no problem because all I have to do is look out the window and you can almost see a homeless shelter adjacent to Rogers Place. Any one of those people would give everything they have to spend one night in this hotel. So it's not that much of an imposition, and I'm looking forward to being able to get into the bubble. But you are correct. I have time on my hands. So here we go.
Well, you speak about it. You're experiencing a part of life that very few of us, how many are sitting in the bubble, get to experience. What's life in the bubble like? Being kind of off on your own, not being able to interact with the bigger society. Like, what has it been like?
Well, I'm not in the bubble yet. It's going to take a couple of days before I'm free to move around. I think my quarantine period is over on Thursday morning, just in time to work on Game 3 of the Western Conference Final. But life in the bubble, according to some players and coaches I've talked to, is a bit of a challenge because it's about, battling boredom, repetition, etc., missing your loved ones. If you're a younger player with a young family, you miss your wife and kids if you have children. So, you have to worry about all of that, I guess. But the flip side of it is there are absolutely no distractions here. So your total focus can be on hockey. And I think that's why we've seen some high event games in these playoffs.
And I should have phrased that better. What is, you're sitting in confinement or whatever you want to call it for 4 days. How's that been? You talk about the homeless shelter and looking at it and you go, well, that puts it in perspective. But what have you been doing to keep yourself occupied? 4 days isn't a whole heck of a long time, but at the same time, if you're stuck to the confines of a room, I assume it's rather boring at times.
This is a very nice room, but I can walk from one side of it to the other in about 9 seconds. So, but look, again, no complaints whatsoever. I look at a lot of hockey video. I take a lot of time in the morning to read the hockey clips, the news stories, watch the games that are on at night. I've often said I do nothing better than anything. And so it's not hard to kill 4 days. Sure, it's a bit of a trial after a while, but as I say, you just need some perspective. I'd like to think I have that, and it's not bad. It's fine.
Have you picked up any hobbies through the COVID-19 pandemic while being sitting at home? Have you read more, or I don't know, maybe crossword puzzles?
Well, the last book I read actually, and I I regret to say that I haven't read a lot during the pandemic. I have Brad Thor's book. It's just underneath the computer here, so I can get a better angle of my lovely face. Brad Thor is one of the great authors about counterterrorism, and I've read most of his books, and I imagine myself to be that guy fighting terrorism. So it's down to that now, right? That's all. And before that, I read John Grisham's book, but his last book. But mostly, like everybody else, my wife and I tore through Tiger King, Ozark, The Last Dance. So a lot of Netflix. And as for hobbies, no need to develop any of those because we spend a lot of time. And even through the pandemic, working on our project to build the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre. A lot of meetings and Zoom meetings, etc., to conduct what role we have in it to conduct the business of building the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre. So that takes up a lot of our time.
Well, I want to get to the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre. I know we were talking about it before we started, but before we get to that, with all my guests, I like to find, a little bit about their backstory. I'd read a little bit up on you, that you had started out as a med student, and then through one way or another, you slowly slide into broadcasting. But you're originally from Nova Scotia, correct?
Right. Yeah, we were all born in Cape Breton, in Sydney, Nova Scotia. When I was in my early teens, just starting high school, my father took a job in Newfoundland. So I went to high school there, but high school only went to grade 11. And after that, I went to university. It was a pre-med course I was in. I wasn't a med student by any stretch of the imagination, taking science courses basically. But I started hanging out at the university radio station. It's called MUN Radio. I'm not sure what it's called now. And I fell in love with the sound of my own voice there. So, I guess there's a case to be made for that. But I was drawn to sports coverage, and we covered Memorial University hockey games, sportscasts on MUN Radio, etc. Did a lot of those. And so somebody said to me one day, "You should apply for that summer relief sportscaster job at CBC Newfoundland." CBNT were the call letters of the St. John station. Probably still are. So I applied for the job, and I didn't hear anything for about 2 weeks, and so I phoned over. And the guy who answered the phone was one of the sportscasters. They had two at the time. And he said to me, "As a matter of fact, you're the only person to apply. So why don't you come in and start on Monday?" Which proved from the outset that the only way for me to get a job was if no one else applied. I did that summer relief job for 2 years. At the end of the second year, one of the full-time sportscasters quit to go to law school, and so the full-time job came open, and I applied for it. And don't ask me how, because at the time I spoke faster than the speed of light. I thought I knew everything, and if I had to, I could get it all out in one long sentence. But somehow I got the job. And my father was he was anywhere from out of sorts with gusts up to furious, because he had come from that working class generation that to him meant he just wanted his kids to do a little bit better than him. And for him, that entailed a university education. And I'd been in school and university for 2 years, I guess. And then I said, "Don't worry, I'm only going to do this job for a year, and then I'm going to go back to university, get my degree." Then I got to go to the Olympics. This is a long story, isn't it?
Oh, it's good.
Excuse me. So then I got to go to the Olympics in 1976. I was 22 years old. I was the youngest guy there as far as commentators went. And that was it for me. Then I was not going back to school because I thought I had made it in the business. I mean, it was an honor to go to the Olympics in 76, to be sure, but it was the first endeavor by any host broadcaster to have commentators in Canada, to have commentators for almost every sport and on the air for, I think it was 12 or 14 hours a day. So basically anyone who could speak English was picked to go. But that, I didn't quite get that at the time. I had made it, I thought. And as a result, I didn't go back to school. And I think my father asked me almost every month until he died about 6 or 7 years ago, when I was going to go back to university to finish my degree, so I'd have something to fall back on when the CBC and Hockey Night in Canada, and now Rogers, figured out I was no good. I still wait for that phone call. But anyway, I never did go back. And so here I am. I guess this is now some 40, 42, 43 years later.
A hell of a career. A hell of a career.
A long one, I think, is the best way to describe it.
I think you're too hard on yourself. You've covered, what is it now, 12 Olympics?
Actually, I counted that up a while ago. It's 15.
Is it 15?
Yeah. I didn't go to the last Winter Olympics in Korea because I was then required to work on Hockey Night in Canada, and the schedule was, as you know, hockey continued, so wasn't possible for me to take time off and go to Korea for those games. So 15, again, pardon me, and I'm being stuck in my hotel room here has got me all kind of phlegmed up. But I don't know if I'll do any more. Probably not. But 15 is a good number.
15's impressive. Yes. Where I was going to ask, where in 1976? Where were the Olympics?
Montreal.
Oh yeah. And what is maybe as being a young guy there, I can just imagine. Your eyes must have been wide open. What were some of the things that stuck out about your first Olympics? What did you even cover?
Covered wrestling. And again, as I said earlier, back then I thought I knew everything. And when it came to wrestling, I went out with a few wrestlers at the Memorial University of Newfoundland to learn the basics, and they threw me around the mat at will. But, I headed into the 76 Olympics as the main announcer for wrestling. The analyst, the color commentators, guy named Ole Sorensen, who had wrestled in the Olympics in Munich in 1972. But that didn't bother me because my main goal seemed to be to do all the talking and not let him talk at all, because I had a lot of information to get out. This is one of the curses of a young broadcaster, thinking he knows everything and trying to stake his claim to a sport and get his depth of knowledge out there as quickly as possible. I look back on that and think it was a good lesson. Many, many years later, I do defer to those who really know what they're talking about. But back then, I guess, as you've asked what my most vivid memory was that I did a lot of talking and managed to not give Ole his fair share of airtime. But we worked together many times after that, and it was a good lesson for me.
Growing up, you mentioned being on the Rock out on Newfoundland. Was radio something you just stumble into? I know you say you fall in love with it at university by following or getting to the college campus radio station. But was it something growing up you're like, I wouldn't mind doing that someday, or you literally had no thoughts of it?
No, I did. It wasn't like I just fell into it and thought, well, this is pretty neat. When I was a kid growing up in Sydney, Nova Scotia, Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday night was appointment viewing. And Danny Gallivan did the Canadians games. And back then you either got Montreal or Toronto on a Saturday night. And Danny Gallivan was from Whitney Pier in Sydney. So we had an association with him. And I used to listen to him and just marvel over what a colorful play-by-play announcer he was. Danny invented words, a cannonading drive, and some university professor wrote him once and said, "There's no such word as cannonading," and Danny wrote back and said, "Now there is." And my father was from Whitney Pier as well, and there was a little bit of, oh, look at Danny now with his big words. Who does he think he is? That was sort of the attitude of a lot of people in Cape Breton. But I used to listen to him with great admiration, and that kind of got me interested in the prospect of working in broadcasting as an announcer, because, like a lot of kids back then, I had a lot to say, and sort of piqued my interest at that point. And I was very, very fortunate years later to have an opportunity to try it out at Mun Radio on the campus of Memorial University, and that's where it all started.
It's I find that fascinating that just You hear it in a lot of people's stories. Some people call it luck. Some people call it timing. Some people just go, there's no point in looking at these events, but just, college campus radio, and then you apply for a part-time job. You're the only guy who applies for it, which is kind of hilarious,
Well, the reason for that was that back then, that would have been 1973. So broadcasting, believe it or not, back then, CBNT St. John's was still black and white. And broadcasting was seen sort of as it's not fair to say a novelty, but it wasn't the widely pursued career that it's become. If that job was to come open today, I'd have no chance of getting it, probably, most likely. And the lineup for people, trying to get it, pardon me, who'd apply for it, would have stretched for miles. But, I was fooling around at the university radio station. I don't know how many people knew the job came open. If it was even posted somewhere, it wasn't in the paper, I don't think. And so, that was one of the reasons, I guess, that I was lucky enough to be the only one.
Yeah, timing. You just, you're talking about timing and different, if it had been 10 years later, chances are the opportunity wouldn't have presented itself the same way. What was a guy back then making? Do you remember what you made your first, going to the Olympics and covering that? Do you remember how much money you were making back then?
Well, let's go back before that. My first job was my father had become a manager of a steel plant in Newfoundland. And I worked there in the summer and a couple of times during the winter break in between the first and second semesters. So probably 3 weeks during the winter. And I made $1.80 if I worked on the bundler, or $1.90 an hour if I worked on the hotbed. And you were lucky if you worked a lot of overtime. At the end of that week, you'd come out with $100. And thought I had made it. Bought a used Volkswagen, I think, for $350 was my first car. So fast forward to getting the job at CBC Newfoundland, I think the first salary there was about $8,500 or $9,000 a year. And I thought I'd made it. I was living at home. I bought a Triumph Spitfire sports car. So, I was ready to go around town. I was a man about town. And I might argue that I was better off financially then than I am now. No, that's not true. Because, I've worked a long time, but would have been true perhaps many years ago. But yeah, those were the salaries. And, things have changed appreciably, but markedly. But that was the way it was back then.
You mentioned several times that you thought you'd made it. You thought you'd made it. When did you realize I haven't made it?
It's a good question. I honestly have never viewed it that way, because you're only as good as your last show. And, I've had some that I've, screwed up royally. Other people might not view it that way, but they bothered me. And my goal has always been to be good enough on one show to get invited back to do the next one. And that's how I've always viewed it. I've never really thought that I've made it, even though I'm a lot closer to the end of my career than the start. But I'm still driven to do as good a job as possible, and hope that at the end of the broadcast, I get up out of the chair and go, okay, that was okay. They'll probably have you back for one more.
But at some point along the way, you must have went from thinking, man, you talk about getting $9,000 as salary. I've made it. This is awesome. This is amazing. At what point did you go, ooh, there's a lot more road to go here? At what point did you realize, wow, there is a lot left to do?
Probably when we had kids. My wife and I were married. We've been married now for 40 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Had our 40th anniversary last month. In June. I guess having kids changes your perspective on everything. By the way, the 40 years of marriage has only worked because I've only been around for 20 of them. That's one of my standard lines. I've used it many times. But when you have children, your outlook on everything changes, because the day our first child, Bruce, was born, I thought to myself, I have to provide for him now, probably for the, up until he's 20, 21, and quite likely for the rest of his life, I'll have to be there for him. And so everything changes then. And that's when I realized that, and Darcy was born 2 years later, that, you, not that I didn't take it seriously before then, because I certainly did, but that I needed to really be secure in this career, to know that I could provide for my family.
Yeah, that's well, anyone who's had kids knows exactly what you're talking about. That is, you wake up one morning and there's a bundle of joy sitting there looking at you and squirming and everything else that comes with it, pooping black and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But the responsibility that goes on your shoulders as soon as that happens is something you've never, ever experienced up until that point, ever.
Yeah, no, that's true. And, our kids were everything to us, and still are. It's a difficult question when people say, and I know we'll get to this, but, Bruce battled addiction in the last 5 years of his life, and he lost his battle in 2011 when he was 25. People often ask us, how many kids do you have? And I say one because it's easier, but I'm not very proud of myself when I do that. My wife takes the harder road, and she says, we have two, but only one is living. And that, of course, is Darcy. So we never forget Bruce, but, our kids were and are everything. Bruce will live forever in the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre, which is another topic that we'll get to at some point here, I know. So, yeah, it's being a parent is, there's lots of books on it, but really you find yourself making it up as you go along in a lot of ways. And, we treasured our time with our kids, still do.
We can talk about it. I'd love to hear the story of Bruce. I was saying to you before we started, I got 3 kids, 4 and under. Or I guess he's slowly getting past 4. But one of the things I've mentioned many a time on this, talking to different people from all walks of life, is one of the things, we talk about the responsibility that comes with having your first child and any child after that. One of the first things you think about at some point, not long after, is all the things that you want to try and find a way to steer them around. How can I map out it so they never come in contact with that? And drugs is a big one. And obviously, most people know your story, but I think it'd be great for you to share Bruce's story and the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre and just a little bit about it, because you've went through it. You're still obviously doing things to try and help now, and I think it's great to talk about.
So Bruce was born August of 85, bundle of joy, very precocious kid. When Ann and I speak in public, and often we'll answer requests from different groups to come out and tell Bruce's story and what we're doing with the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre. And I insist that I drop a few anecdotes in there to give people an idea of what Bruce was like as a kid. One is that when he was about, I think 3.5, we were in front of the house playing street hockey. He, by then, had figured out that Dad does something on TV. He had a fair idea that mine wasn't just the ordinary job, that I was in broadcasting. I don't mean to disparage any other jobs, but, to him it was kind of special, I guess. And so we're again in front of the house playing street hockey, and I'm like any father, I'm telling him, this is how you hold the stick, this is how you shoot, this is how you stick handle. And pretty soon he'd had it with my litany of instructions. He stopped cold and he looked up at me and he said, Dad, if you know so much about it, you should be playing it, not just talking about it. So at that point he had figured out that his father was pretty much nothing more than a professional gas bag. But, that was part of his precociousness. He was a talented athlete. He not naturally talented, but he survived a lot on guts. He was very courageous. He was a Canada Games boxer. As a kid, he would get into the ring as 15 years old and fight somebody 3 years older and do okay. He did, though, make one classic error, mistake in judgment. He thought that because I could talk about boxing, because I covered it at a couple of Olympics, thought that because I could talk about it, that I could actually do it. And so when he was training for the Canada Games, I would go to his training sessions, and after every one of them, he would ask me to get into the ring. So he wanted to see what the old man had. I knew that was a loser's game. And so I wisely declined every invitation until one day we were at one of the boxing clubs that he worked out at, not too far from our house. He was the last one there. So he was going to be turning out the lights, and he was just doing some heavy bag work at the time. And actually, Darcy and I went to get him. And I thought, what's the worst that could happen? There's no one here to see it except Darcy. And so don't ask me why, but I accepted the invitation and got into the ring, gloved up, and within 20 seconds, I was bent over against the corner turnbuckle, blows raining down on my kidneys, hoping that I'd be passing blood for only about 2 weeks. And, it's funny because a lot of teenagers, 14, 15 years of age, probably have had this thought, I could take the old man, right? But in a loving, caring home like ours, why would Bruce have had any reason to find out? But sadly, he had his answer at the age of 15. And the deepest cut of all came on the way home. We were driving home. He said, Dad, if a criminal broke into our house, I'd have to save us. You couldn't do it. So we trade on those memories a lot. By the way, he also made the varsity basketball team, high school. He was a very talented hip-hop artist. Used to go into a lot of rap battles and win them. One night when he was in his final year of high school, Am was out of town visiting a friend, so I was in charge of the household. And he asked me if he could go to a rap battle at the University of Manitoba. I said, sure, go ahead, but be home by 10. 10 o'clock came, he's not home. 11 o'clock, he's not home. And I'm getting angrier. By midnight, I'm standing at the front door waiting to invoke all manner of punishment when he comes to the door. And he comes to the door and disarmed me immediately by waving 5 crisp $100 bills. And he said, look, Dad, I won the whole contest. And I said, son, that's the way to come home late. Now get to bed. So those are, we have a lot of great memories about Bruce because his life was about more than his addiction, for sure. But the last 5 years of his life was a roller coaster of active addiction, recovery, relapse. In high school, it was a bit of weed, I guess, which doesn't separate him from a lot of kids. But Bruce was diagnosed at an early age with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, which made him ripe for taking chances. So from weed, it was ecstasy, I guess, at parties on the weekend, and crystal meth after that. And from those drugs, it wasn't a giant leap into the opioids and the drug that eventually claimed his life, heroin. And, we never lost touch with Bruce. We were always on him to get himself straightened out. And we always said to him, if there's a problem, come to us and we'll help you. But at the time, we didn't know much about the signs of drug addiction. And, sadly, that was the 5-year journey of active addiction, recovery, relapse ended tragically.
You go from weed to ecstasy to crack. Once again, I should probably state this very start. I probably live in a box, sheltered from people, and so take this with a grain of salt. Isn't that a giant jump, or am I just off of my rocker?
Not for a lot of people. It's the path that many an addict has followed. Pardon me again. It's a common path. It happens. If you can accept the fact that addiction is a disease, it's defined by many medical personnel as a chronic brain disorder. And if you are an addict, you can take that path, and that's what happened to Bruce. May seem like a giant leap and to us at the time it was, but the more we came to learn about it, we could understand how it happened. No matter how hard you try to protect your kids, unless you're going to be the helicopter parent that sits over them 24/7, they're going to be faced with choices in life. You have to hope that you've educated them enough that they will make the right choices. But if you have a kid who has ADHD and almost certainly had the addictive gene, and there's some arguments about that, but we believe it to be true, then that path is not all that uncommon.
Well, you talk about helicopter parents. Even a helicopter parent, eventually, there's going to be a moment where they're not there, right? Like, that's impossible.
Yeah.
So you got to educate. Me acting, not taking your advice off the hop, but my thought is with children is you got to educate off the hop. I mean, they're going to be exposed to it. I just told you before we started, 4 siblings, 5 of us kids, all of us exposed to it in different ways. I'm sure yourself at a young age, at some point, you're exposed to different things, and it's, you're the one that has to make the choice.
Well, of course. Look, we had 2 children, separated by 2 years. Bruce born in 85, Darcy in 87. 2 boys raised in the same loving home in Winnipeg. Children of privilege, really, but raised the same way. I mean, you have to make some adjustments depending on children's needs as you go along, but the general principles of how we raised our kids were the same for both. And Darcy has gone on to become an internationally renowned illusionist, making his way in the world just fine. And the other guy fell victim to addiction. So if we want to introduce that question of is it nature versus nurture, we are here to say, as are many other families who would have children headed in similar directions, one right, one wrong, that it's not nurture, because our kids were raised the same way. So we believe firmly that it was nature, that, addiction grabbed hold of Bruce and would not let go. And it didn't happen to Darcy. So, we believe firmly in it being nature as opposed to nurture.
I hate to pry, and I don't know if it is even prying, and you told me not to apologize before we started, but when you look back at it then, there's no if we would have done this differently, maybe it would have turned out differently? No.
We don't lose any sleep over woulda, coulda, shoulda. And I think in large part, that's why we were able to deal with our grief in such a positive way, is to establish a much needed long-term recovery center in Bruce's name. We did everything we possibly could to keep Bruce alive. We perhaps wish we had known more about the signs of addiction when it first happened to him, but we did the best we could. We did everything we could. We were with Bruce every step of the way. We took him to 3 long-term or treatment centers. He was in detox 8 or 9 times at our urging. And he wanted a better life, and he fought hard for it, but he just could not overcome his addiction. It happens. For some addicts, talk about rock bottom. Tragically for some, rock bottom is death. And that's what it was for Bruce. A lot of, families don't get through the death of a child because a lot of finger pointing starts after, right? You did this, and I tried to do this, but you wouldn't support me. But my wife and I were always, Ann and I were always on the same wavelength. We never argued over what we thought or what help we could give Bruce, how we could help him. Getting him to treatment, to detox, etc. We were always on the same wavelength, which is why, we, and Darcy as well, why we came out of Bruce's passing probably stronger as a family than we were before. So, we don't look back on it and go, why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do that? We did the best we could with what information we had, and when the information became more and more critical, we acted and tried our best.
You mentioned the early warning signs, if you had known maybe what to look for. In the beginning, then there was nothing noticeable. You I don't even know. I don't even know what the signs of hard drugs are. But in the beginning, there was no noticeable change then that you. Well,
we knew that there was some drug involvement, but we didn't know that he had become addicted until we were at my parents' place in Nova Scotia for my mother's 75th birthday, and Bruce had called to say that he wasn't living at home then. He was living with a buddy of his in a house in a difficult area of Winnipeg. We were on him every day to get work, to get his life straightened out. So we were not those parents who ever said, go, and don't come back till you get it sorted out. There's an expression in AA, I think it's called let go and let God. But we didn't do that. We always wanted to know that our kid was safe, that we wanted the best for him, and we were hard on him to get his life sorted out. But we never really knew the depth of his addiction until he called that one day when we were at my parents' place for my mother's birthday and said he'd been assaulted by a gang member. And we hadn't seen him at that point for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. And when we got back from Nova Scotia and Darcy brought him to the house, it became clear to us then that he had a very serious addiction problem. My wife is a nurse, so trained medical professional. She was able to identify it right away. And off we went to emergency at Health Sciences Centre, where we sat for probably 6 or 7 hours before a doctor could see him. The doctor identified the problem immediately and said he could put Bruce on the waiting list for Addictions Foundation of Manitoba, which is the public service for addiction recovery, addiction treatment. But it was going to be, I think he said at the time, 4 to 6 weeks, or we could go private. And we wanted this problem solved immediately. And so we said he would go private. So just fast forward here, I got on the internet and found this place that I thought it was the first one to, Google searches, you can prioritize how quickly you appear on a Google search, I guess, algorithms or whatever it is. I thought this place was in Winnipeg. And I called them and said, our son's in trouble and I want to bring him. And they said, okay, well, we're in Toronto. That shocked me, but I said, fine. So he had to detox at Health Sciences for about 4 or 5 days, and he did. And then I took him to Bellwood. That's the place in Toronto. And he was there for 6 weeks at great expense. But we were willing to pay any amount of money to get this sorted out. But sadly, that was just the start of that journey that I talked about earlier, where it was 5 years of active addiction, recovery, and relapse.
In the 5 years,
I said 5. It's somewhere between 4.5 and 5.
Not that the number doesn't matter. Was there times during that span where you thought it was beat?
Yes. There are a number of books that my wife and I read. One that she read that I didn't, but she passed this on to me, was a woman, and the book was called Addict in the Family. And a woman in that book was quoted as saying, last year I was so happy that my daughter got into Harvard. Tonight I'm so happy because she's in jail and I know where she is and she's safe tonight. So that's how fast it can happen, right? So we took heart when Bruce was in Bellwood, because we thought that this was going to fix the problem, that 6 weeks would be enough to get everything sorted out and we'd all go back to our happy lives, which turned out to not be the case. But when we got him to this long-term place in Calgary, it was after Bellwood, he moved to Halifax, and he was there for less than a year before everything went off the rails, because Halifax as a port city means that there's easier access to opioids. They come in on boats. And within, I think, 7 or 8 months of his time in Halifax, he'd become an IV addict. So we dragged him out of that mess and got him to a long-term facility in Calgary called Simon House. And that's when we had real hope, because Simon House is a long-term facility where it's 3 phases. You'd spend whatever time it took in phase 1 to get to phase 2, usually about 12, 13 weeks. Bruce was almost a year in phase 1 and went into phase 2 and couldn't handle the freedom, as it turned out. But during his time in Simon House, we had real hope, because he'd been there for almost a year. And we thought, we were secure in the knowledge that he was safe and that he was really trying hard and that gave us a lot of hope. But as soon as he got into phase 2, he failed a drug test and had to leave. And again, the cycle of active addiction, recovery, relapse took hold.
Because you guys are, you mentioned you're currently building the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre. Is the long-term centers then, that's what you learn out of this entire journey? Was that the best, you think, for people who are addicted to substances? That's the best hope, is a long-term facility that...
Yes. Yeah, 100%. One of the critical lessons learned during Bruce's journey was that 21 days, 45 days, 90 days, again, pardon me, are not nearly long enough for someone who was profoundly as addicted as Bruce was. If you're an IV addict, if you're slamming heroin into your arm and you think 21 days is going to fix anything, then you're probably dreaming in Technicolor. And maybe the same for 45 and 90 days. A lot of people in the world of addiction recovery refer to those shorter term programs as rinse and wash or spin dries. Just enough to get you feeling not bad, and away you go and you start again. And that's what happened to Bruce a number of times. The Bruce Oake Recovery Centre will have 2 major cornerstones, and it's modeled after a facility in Calgary. It will be modeled after a facility in Calgary called Fresh Start. Fresh Start 3 times, if not 4, has been named the #1 recovery centre in Canada by the Fraser Institute. It has an astounding success rate of 56%. And it's those are real numbers, because it's not measured on a 21-day or a 45-day or a 90-day program. If you're running a 45-day program and 3/4 of the people get through it, then you can easily say we have a 75% success rate, right? Fresh Start's success rate is measured on 1 year of sobriety after entering the program. So 56, I think it's now 57%, is astronomical in the world of addiction recovery. So that's the program we're going to run at the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre. It's long-term. As I mentioned earlier, 3 phases. Phase 1, you go through the hardcore 12-week program in the main facility. Phase 2, if you're ready, and you don't move out if you're not ready, you can stay in the main facility until you are ready. But if you are ready, you move into transitional housing, you get a job. You remain committed to the program. You live under a lot of restrictions. And then phase 3 is where you will live under less restrictions and hopefully be ready at some point to move back into society, living independently. You can stay for as long as it takes to get it right. It can be a year, it can be 2 years, could even be 3. Whatever it takes to get it right. So a continuum of care is everything in the world of addiction treatment, addiction recovery. And we will offer that consistent with what Fresh Start offers. And the second cornerstone is anyone who can't afford to pay will not be turned away. They'll be covered by a combination of social assistance and fundraising. This has worked at Fresh Start for a 1/4 century, and we know it's going to work at the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre. So a continuum of care and addiction and recovery at no cost that's a game changer, we think, in the world of addiction recovery, and we're delighted to say that those will be the cornerstones of the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre.
I assume it's given you, with losing a son, that could not have been horrendous, right? I can't think of the word to say. But by having something like the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre, it gives something, I would assume, to put your energy, your emotion, everything into to make his name live on and to try and help some people.
Well, his name will live forever. This will be his legacy. When you lose a child, you have a lot of choices you can make. You can choose to compartmentalize your grief and carry on as best you can. You can choose to grieve in any way you like. There's nothing wrong with what people do if it works for them. Our choice was to give voice to our grief and to try to make Bruce's life mean something. And ultimately to provide a service that will help ensure, it's not going to fix everything, but will help ensure that people in Bruce's situation don't have to lose their lives. And that's been our driving force. And we acted on that soon after Bruce died. We finally got traction with the government and at all levels of government, city and province, both levels, I should say. And we're still working on federal contribution. A couple of years after Bruce passed away, and traction finally occurred, I guess 3 or 4 years ago. And the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre, I'm proud to say, is now, and anyone can go on our website, bruceoake.ca or bruceoakerecoverycentre.ca and see the progress we've made. The building is, it's approaching half done now. 43,000 square feet in the west end of Winnipeg, in a beautiful residential neighborhood with a lot of serenity around it, trails, etc. It's a gorgeous location, and it's going to make a difference.
Well, and you're in the position to make that happen. You're a national figure, whether you want it or not. You're on a hockey night in Canada. It's pretty much the gospel in Canada. You can't get any bigger than that. So to have your voice behind a project, I'm sure helped immensely. But even then, thinking about that, like 2011 till now, that's a long time to get a project up.
I should explain. Yeah, I should give you the time frame, and then I'll talk about how I was able to use my platform, and Darcy as well, because Darcy's well known in the business of entertainment as well. But the time frame was such that when Bruce died, we were grief stricken and didn't know really what to do. A friend of ours said, "Well, let's go to the Winnipeg Foundation and we'll start a fund in case we ever want to do anything in Bruce's memory." And that was the seedling of the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre. And then along the way, I guess over the course of the first year of Bruce's passing, we talked about what we could do. And our first thought was, well, let's get a fund going, and then we can send people to rehab. We can pay for people to go to treatment centers. And that was going to be our fallback position if the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre didn't work. Then it was happenstance. We met someone from Fresh Start who said, "Why don't you, talk to us? We'll see if we can help you." And Fresh Start's been great throughout this whole thing. There was a period of about 4 years where we were going in circles. Unless you have someone to advocate for you at the government level, it's going to be hard to get anywhere. We finally met that person about 6 years after Bruce died, 7 years, I guess it was. And that's when I say we got traction, because she knew how to navigate. Her name is Marnie Larkin. She knew how to navigate the halls of the legislature and City Hall, and she began driving the bus for us, and that's when everything changed. So yeah, there was a long period of time where we were going in circles, knew what we wanted to do, but found ourselves in that situation where you met with somebody 1 month and then 6 months later you're back meeting the same person. So we needed to have that advocate, and we found her. Just by luck, I was emceeing a dinner one night that she was running, and she said, "Why don't you come see me tomorrow? Maybe I can help you." And that was the start of how things took hold. And over the course of, we launched our first capital fundraising campaign last August. So just about 13 months ago on Bruce's birthday, August 22nd. And we raised our first $10 million in about 7 months. So the community responded in a way that was overwhelming. But you don't have to shake a family tree too hard to get an addict or an alcoholic to fall out, right? So this is a common problem in society. And we found that a lot of families, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses were in fact, eager, didn't have to be talked into it. We're eager to make a commitment. So in total, we've raised about $60 million, which is enough to get the building up and gives us a little leeway to run it. And we're soon going to be launching a second capital fundraising campaign to address operating costs. So we're going to be up and running the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre at the end of May of 21.
That's a lot of money. Jeez. And that's impressive. Like,
well, okay. So yeah. And so let's address the platform as you mentioned a moment ago, Sean. I don't apologize for using what platform I had to better, to make the world
why
a
would
better
you?
place. Well, there were a lot of people when we started saying he's taking advantage of his position. We encountered a lot of opposition from residents of the area. There's a thing called NIMBY, not in my backyard, right?
Okay.
You should expect that when you're trying to establish a recovery center in the middle of a residential neighborhood, because people don't know what they don't know. So you are required really to run an educational campaign, and I'm proud to say we did that.
So
we sent-
in people's minds, just so I can clarify this, by having a recovery center in the middle of a residential area, the thought process going around is there's going to be drug addicts running.
Yes, there are going to
way
be
around
roving bands of drug addicts will take over the neighborhood. We will not be safe in our house. The real estate prices here will collapse. Consider that if you're in your 80s and you're still in reasonable health, you're living in the house you've been in your whole life, it's your single greatest investment that you've ever made, and you know that when you can't stay there anymore, you can sell it and move into an assisted living facility. Have the money to pay for that. But there were a lot of people who were fear mongering and convinced a number of the area residents that this horrid scenario that I just outlined, drug addicts taking over the neighborhood was going to take hold, and that they wouldn't be safe to leave their houses. When in fact the opposite is true. Studies prove crime is more likely to occur around a grocery or a liquor store than it is around a recovery center. There is no business for drug dealers around a recovery center. And in fact, in the case of the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre, we were gifted an old arena in the west end of Winnipeg that had been shuttered for about 4 or 5 years. A large dark building, and all manner of bad behavior was going on around that building at night. So we made the case that we're going to make the neighborhood better. It's going to be safer than it is now. And we did conduct that educational campaign that involved flyers to hundreds of homes in the area. Many elongated email exchanges with community leaders, meetings with community leaders. We established a community committee, and we had 4 public information sessions where people could come and state their case and articulate their fears. And we listened. We listened to the extent that we altered plans for the facility to include public use of the gymnasium because the residents were concerned that they were losing a recreational facility. The rink had been shuttered for years, but still, I guess they clung to the hope that it was going to reopen, which it never was because it was way past its best before date. There were no plans to reopen it. But we listened to that concern about a recreational facility and the loss of one, and we altered the plans to include public use of the gymnasium with a separate public entrance, public change rooms, etc. And along the way, I'm proud to say that our message began to sink in. Residents realized that they have nothing to fear from the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre, that the men of the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre, as the men of the Fresh Start Recovery Centre in Calgary are, will be good neighbors. They'll be there to help out. They'll be focused on one thing, their recovery. They will not be engaging in drug use. They will be solid neighbors, and it has been proven. Some people subscribe to the notion that recovery centers are best off in rural or industrial areas where those seeking recovery are neither seen nor heard from. Most clear-thinking people in the world of addiction recovery know that those seeking recovery have their best chance when they're included, when they're not ostracized or judged and sent away to an outpost somewhere. So this is how addiction recovery works these days, and we got our message through, and the people who were in favor of it were, I guess, not as loud as the ones who were against it, but we won the battle eventually. And I think we've already had some emails from residents of the area saying the building has already spruced up the neighborhood, and we're looking forward to it. So it was a difficult and sometimes frustrating battle, but you have to expect that, and we persevered.
Well, you're dealing with misconceptions and people fearing what they don't understand, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and if someone comes along and fans the flames of that fear, then pretty soon you can have a flammable situation on your hands. And there were people that fanned the flames of fear that didn't know what they were talking about. But we took the high road. We never got down in the gutter, and we just worked hard and got our message through.
So it's going to be a happy day in another. When did you say it's supposed to open?
End of May.
Scott?
End of May 2021. Yeah.
Well, the day is fast approaching. I know we still got many months ahead of you, but I mean, considering where you started from, it's not that long away, and you're going to have the center up and running. What are you most excited for?
Excited for the opening and the first people who become clients of the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre, because that's the day we start. It's not the finish line, right, to get the place up and running.
Yeah.
It's the start line,
yeah.
The day that we can start saving lives. And that's what it's about. It's saving lives. You know, we're caught now in a pandemic that has changed the world and probably will forever. The need for addiction services, recovery beds, before the pandemic took hold was already acute. On the other side of this pandemic, whatever it looks like, the need for services like the Bruce Oake Recovery Centre is going to be through the roof, because that's just a simple fact of life. People losing their jobs and losing hope and and ending up in substance abuse situations. So we're excited to be able to provide a service that can address that in whatever way it does, and that's 50 beds in a long-term recovery center.
What advice would you give other parents that are going through something like what you've gone through? Is there anything you can share that would, if they're listening, maybe they could help them with what they're going through?
Well, to each his own. There's a million people out there who will tell you how you should feel and what you should do. But Ann and I are of the firm belief that how you feel is how you feel, and you deal with your grief the best way you can. So if you're talking about families that have lost children, Ann and I have spent a lot of time talking to them. But we're not the ultimate authority on losing a child, right? And we're not recommending that anyone who's lost a child to addiction should run out and try to raise $16 million to build a recovery center. But if we had one message, I guess it would be that you can find your place. There is a way to give voice to your grief and to trade on the good memories. And we always say that, trade on the good memories, right, of your child, and in time find your place and do what you can to make your child's life mean something.
No, I think that's great advice. I would say hop in there one. You said, not everybody can go out and raise $16 million, but not everybody has to. You're in a position where, like I said before, you're on a nationally broadcasted show. So your, lack of a better term, sphere of influence, let's call it, is big. But for people who, I think a good lesson for anyone listening, whether they have, children or anyone that's going through this or not, is you can still help your area, whether it's just volunteering down the street or what. You don't need to raise a big sum of money to be a benefit to the people around you. You can do things that can help. And just by doing things like that can, really bring a positive spot to your life. And, in a world right now where it just seems like every day, it's things are starting, school starts tomorrow, for my wife at least. And by the time I guess this airs, it'll be a weekend, but things are maybe slowly kind of going back. We got NHL back playing, and, we're having something to watch is great. But for the most part, the last 6-7 months have been, shall we say, interesting. And positivity at times is hard to find. And I don't think everybody has to go and do something giant. You can do little things. Little things add up. And if everyone went and did a little thing, I mean, think of what you could do and the positivity you could spread all around the planet, let alone just your little area.
Well, the greatest calling in the world is to be of service to others, right? And there are lots of ways to do it. If you choose to do it, if you want to give voice to your grief in any way possible, sure, it can be volunteering, it can be anything whatsoever. And the only thing I would say about it is that it will give your life some purpose. It will allow you to feel like your child's life means something in whatever form you choose to do it. Simple as that.
Well, I do appreciate you hopping on to talk about this. It's been an interesting hour.
Has it been an hour?
Yeah, pretty close.
I think my first answer was an hour. That story about how I got my first job, I pledged to try to get that down to 2 minutes, but it's just not possible.
Are you excited to, flip it over to hockey for a sec? Are you excited to be in the bubble, or are you kind of like, it's going to be kind of weird?
Well, I've already been in Edmonton for a month, but not in the bubble. So Chris Cuthbert, Louis DeBrusque, and I, now Kyle Bukauskas is here as well, not in the bubble, would go into Rogers Place through a separate door and be at a higher level, and come and go as we please, and come and go from our hotel as we please. But I've gone into the bubble at the urging of our producers so that we can have better access to players when it comes to conference final, which the West started last night and the East tonight. And I guess specifically the Stanley Cup final. When that celebration takes place on the ice, you want to have better access to players than them being, pulled into a studio at ice level and you up on the 7th floor talking to them. It's very impersonal. It's worked so far. It's making the best of a bad situation, but we can do better than that. So that's why I've gone into the bubble, and I'm interested to see how it works. When I get out of incarceration here on Thursday morning, I guess part of the good news is that will be the 10th. So there's only about 20 days to go before the whole thing is over. But look, the NHL deserves full credit here because
they do.
They provided a lesson to all pro sports as to how things can work. There was the latest release came out just today, testing for the 6th week of phase 4. And this is not for the whole 6 weeks, but in just the most recent amount of testings, 2,534 tests, all negative. There has not been a single positive test. So me being quarantined here for 4 days is part of the reason that this is working. So, you have to be respectful of that. And this was a huge undertaking that a lot of people were thinking is not going to work. I mean, the first thing people thought was they're not even going to get to the bubble because they're holding training camps in places like Texas and Florida, where, those states are on fire. If there's an outbreak at either the Florida Panthers or the Dallas Stars training camp, the whole thing could just go up in smoke. They won't even get to the bubble, but they did. And restrictions in the bubble have all been proven to be valid, and it's working. And so kudos to the NHL. Pulling this off has been logistically incredibly complicated. Some would call it a nightmare, but they've done it, and they've done it beautifully.
And over the playoffs, let's call it, I don't even know, the last 15 years, you've given some of the best interview moments that I could think of. I was thinking back to when I think it was, now correct me if I'm wrong on this, Scott, was it Ottawa and Anaheim in the finals when you had Snoop Dogg in the stands?
Yeah.
And
that was 07.
07. And then you had the Heartbreak Kid back when the HBK line was a thing for Pittsburgh. You've had some just downright awesome people in the middle of the playoffs. I highly think you're not going to get that this year.
No, I don't think Snoop will be showing up at Rogers Place. He won't be in the bubble or anyone like him. Be lucky if some family members can get there to see the games. That's proving to be a challenge, as it turns out. The Snoop Dogg interview was as a result of the game being in Anaheim. He's from Long Beach, so it wasn't too far away, and he'd become a bit of a hockey fan. And have we got time for this story?
Absolutely, we got enough. Okay. We got time for another hour if you really want. Fire away.
This might take as long as me getting my first job story took. So our producer, Shirley Ajax, said, Snoop's coming to the game tonight. I want you to interview him. I think it was going to be at the end of the second intermission heading for the third period. And I knew who Snoop Dogg was. So, at least I had that starting point, but I wanted it to be special. I wanted it to be different, not just, well, here I am with Snoop Dogg. What do you think of the game? And so when he told me this, I phoned Darcy, our son, and Darcy was much more attuned to current events, or let's just say hipper and with more street cred than I have ever had. And so I called him and I said, I'm going to be interviewing Snoop Dogg tonight. And if I had told him I was going to be interviewing Jesus Christ reincarnate, he couldn't have been any more excited. So I said, what am I going to say? And he goes, okay, say this and write it down. He said, I'm with the Dogfather D.O. Jizzy. Big ups on this crunk planet. What's crackle-laden, nephew? That might have been Russian to me when he first said it. So he said, now read it back to me. And I read it back just that way. And he said, if you say it that way, he's going to hit you. He's going to have one of his guys beat you up. It will sound like you're making fun of him. You got to say it with more conviction. And so he told me how to say it, and or how I should say it. And I got in front of the mirror for, I had to do an opening and some other stuff that night, but I wasn't worried about any of that. All I wanted to do was get this right. And I rehearsed it in front of the mirror for, it might have been 2 hours. And so it came time to interview Snoop. I went over and he had his entourage around him. He had, these guys were behemoths. They were easily 6'5", 6'6" each. Guys looking like they weren't up for any fooling around, right? But I had about, I think 5 or 6 minutes to sit with Snoop before it came time for us to do the interview. Listen to me call him Snoop like he's my buddy. But we had a nice conversation, and during that time I thought, he's a pretty nice guy. I'm going to try this. I'll try it and see how it goes. So we're on. I have to welcome people back from commercial. I'm with one of the great contemporary musicians of our time. I'm with the Dogfather, D.O. Jizzy. Big ups on this crunk planet. What's crack-a-latin, nephew? And he looked at me for a second as if to say, I wasn't quite sure then if he was going to get mad or he liked it, but he looked at me and he said, I'm doing good, baby, and I love the way you said that. And I went, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. I'm not going to be beat up or thrown out of the ring today. And it went from there. And that got more reaction than any interview I think I had ever done to that point, including, anything with Wayne Gretzky or prime ministers or whoever else I had spoken to. And it was neat. Some guy wrote in one of the U.S. dailies a couple of days later that it was a pathetic attempt by an old guy to sound hip, and that I sounded like some loser who had got in front of the mirror for an hour to practice it. And I wanted to write him back and say, you're wrong. I was not in front of the mirror for an hour. It was 2 hours. But anyway, it was neat. And you can still probably find it on YouTube.
Oh, you certainly can.
Yeah, I don't know how many hits it's had, but sadly, that was the peak of my career, and it's all been downhill ever since.
It's funny that even at the peak, you got your detractors, guys who are just like old guy trying to be fun. I thought it was hilarious. I still heck, how many years? You said 2007. It's 13 years.
13 years ago, yeah.
And I still remember watching that. Obviously, the Ottawa jersey and San Wade's from Hillmont, Saskatchewan. You can imagine this area was well in tune with that playoff run, and that was awesome. Even for Snoop, how much stuff has he done with the NHL now in the last 13 years? And it probably stems from that interview. Well,
I think they invited him to the game, and he eagerly accepted the invitation. He was quite taken by the game of hockey, quite liked it. And they had him at All-Star in Los Angeles a couple of years ago. And I actually was supposed to interview him then. I think he was there on Friday night for the Skills. He DJ'd and introduced everybody. There was some raw language in there, as you may recall. And I was supposed to interview him the next day, but he never came back. And I had some, Darcy had given me some new stuff to throw at him. And sadly, I never got to use it on him. But anyway, so
what was the new stuff?
Oh, I can't remember now. He knew the job was dangerous when he took it. Scared? Go to church. I don't know, something like that. Who the heck was it? Wasn't Kendrick Lamar? It was Snoop, I think. It was a Snoop lyric that Darcy had given me. But anyway, you can see how well I've done trying to remember it.
We've talked an awful lot about Bruce, and you mentioned Darcy. Him being a illusionist, I think is that his title?
Yeah.
Like I've watched some of his videos, and that stuff always baffles me. Do you go to his shows and just like, how did he pull that off? Like, are you as impressed
Yeah, we
with
do.
what he does?
We do. There was a time when Darcy was a lot younger, when he got first involved in magic, that he would rehearse in front of us, and so we had a rough idea of how things worked. But as he got more proficient at it, and his reputation grew, he doesn't tell us anything now, and we're happy to watch and enjoy it. He's pretty good. Darcy, when he was younger, was I shouldn't say he's pretty good. He's great. When he was younger, he was on the Manitoba diving prospect team. He's a good athlete, tremendous balance, long and lean, and they identified him as a future prospect. And he liked diving until the coaching got serious and the yelling started, and then he didn't like it. So he from that, he joined the juggling club at school, learned how to juggle, saved up all his money so he could ride a unicycle and juggle. And he mastered that. And then he decided he was going to go into, like a lot of kids, around 10, 11, 9, whatever it was. I think he was around 9, or he got a magic kit for Christmas. And that happens to a lot of kids, and they grow out of it, but he never did. And from the juggling club and the unicycle, he took up magic, and he went to do a few contests at a community club and won them, and that was it. And then he decided magic was going to be his life. And we used to say to him up until about the age of 19, you better have a plan B. And there never was a plan B. There wasn't. And he was good enough to get jobs on cruise ships, and then he went on Britain's Got Talent, and everything exploded from there.
Yeah, now he's been all over the world.
Yeah, he has been. He's like every other entertainer during the pandemic. There's not much going on. He's doing some online stuff, but he had a tour scheduled in Britain that just as the pandemic took hold, had to be canceled. So it's been rescheduled for, I think, November or December, and there's still a question mark as to whether that will go on. Probably not. It'll likely be delayed again. But he's been busy, and he's done some great things.
Magicians, illusionists. I don't know how they do it. It almost hurts your brain when you watch some of the stuff they pull off.
You should just enjoy it. You shouldn't be one of those guys that Google it or
I don't. I got to be honest. I don't Google it, but
have to have the explanation. Enjoy it. Just enjoy it.
I don't have to have the explanation, but I'd be lying to you if my brain doesn't look at it and go, "How the hell is that possible?"
Oh yeah, well that's part of it,
right? Yeah.
And it's difficult now. It's even more difficult than it was for magicians and illusionists of previous eras because of social media. YouTube, for example. Someone does something on YouTube these days. You have a way to look at that 50,000 times and slow it down and freeze it to see where the magic actually occurred. So you've got to be really good these days to make it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I know. I should say that. If you want the explanation, you can find it. But sitting around,
maybe not. Most people. The one thing Darcy always says is he'll have people come up to him and they'll say, "I know how you did that," and tell him. And he said most often it's wrong. So.
I remember years ago watching a magician right in front of us at the Lloyd Fair of all places, and there was probably only it was one of those miserable nights where it rained all day, and the event planners must have just been cursing the heavens. There was only a handful of us sitting in this venue because the weather had been so horrendous all day, and we're sitting there, and this magician got up and he did like 2-3 tricks, and you talk about you could slow it down, you could film it, and you could break down, but it was right in front of your eyes. It was so fast and so hard for your brain to comprehend what he just pulled off with making a girl disappear and appear. You're right. You could have went online and figured out exactly how he did it and went, "Oh yeah, that makes sense," right? But not just sitting and talking about it is an awful lot of fun on trying to figure out how the hell he pulled it off.
Darcy's best trick used to be making our money disappear. He's past that now.
That's probably all children.
Yeah, exactly.
You've over your career, 40 plus years, you've got to sit down with some awfully interesting people. Now, I've mentioned Snoop, but is there other people that just stick out like that was fun?
Well, we do our post-game show. It's called After Hours
Yeah.
On Hockey Night in Canada every Saturday night. It is at the conclusion of the second game of the doubleheader. And on that show, we do our absolute best to get away from hockey talk as soon as we can, because we've already had 6.5 hours of pucks on net with traffic mixed in and get pucks deep, etc. And we're inclined on that show to try to learn about the guest as a person, what makes them tick. The show survives more on stories than it does hockey stats, etc. Stories about growing up or heroes in their life, influences, etc. And I'd like to think that we come away from most of those after-hour shows thinking, hey, that's pretty good. I didn't know that about the guy. Or, people get a chance to learn what he's all about. I'd say this about that long-form interview format of after hours. It can change people's perception of you. And I think it did and a good example would be Roberto Luongo in Vancouver. Wasn't universally popular with Canuck fans for his first few years in Vancouver. And he started coming on after hours and people got to see that he had a very, wry sense of humor. He was engaging. He was willing to tell you stories. And it helped. I think he's made when he was a Canuck about 4 or 5 appearances on the show. Was more than willing to show his personality. And it helped change people's perception of him, certainly Canuck fans. Another guy would be Kevin Bieksa. I mean, he's one of the principals now in our Stanley Cup coverage, and without probably his appearances on After Hours, we don't find him in that role. So there have been a lot of people that, I think had a chance to show their personalities on that program. And as for ones that I remember best of all, Brian McGrattan has been on a couple of times. He's got, I think, almost 10 years of sobriety now. And he was special because he had a message that really resonated with a lot of people in both of his appearances. But I'd like to think that, as I said earlier, there's always a side of the person or something about them that you find out that you might not have known before the show began. And, that's probably the most pleasing part of the program.
Who came up with the idea for After Hours?
After Hours was a show that was originally done just locally in Vancouver. I don't know that it was called After Hours. It was called, might have been called Hockey Talk or something. I don't know what it was called. Can't remember, but it was when the second game of the doubleheader was over, they would come on in Vancouver and talk to a player for 15 or 20 minutes. And it was aired only in Vancouver. And it proved to be popular enough that they adopted the format basically for half an hour to get to the bottom of the clock for the network. And we called it After Hours, and that was the genesis of the program.
Is that your favorite? You talk about getting away from a bit of hockey talk and the dump and chase and being disciplined and blah, blah, blah. It's the one time during the night where you kind of get to see some color out of the players and actually even the broadcasters. Well,
the answer to every question in hockey is either pucks deep or, as I said, pucks on net with traffic mixed in. How many times? In fact, I've said to a couple players, most recently, I think I said it to Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in Edmonton this year. I said, I'm going to ask you a question, and you cannot use get pucks deep in the answer. And he looked at me and he said, "You've stolen my answer." So we have a lot of that during the 2 games of the doubleheader, the intermissions, pregame show, etc. And that's not to say I don't enjoy the game. I love it. I love being part of it and part of the broadcast. But by the time we get through 2 games and intermissions and the pregame show, we're ready for something different. And that's why I really enjoy After Hours.
Yeah, well, it's actually, when we talked on the phone, he said, I'd rather not talk about, I don't know, the playoffs going on. How much have we talked about the playoffs going on? Mm-hmm. And I laugh because I go, honestly, if you really want the sports talk, what are the 24-hour network that just sits and talks about it the entire time?
Yeah, Sportsnet and TSN each have 5 channels. So there's no shortage of places to find hardcore hockey talk, and there's a market for it, and people love it.
Well, hell, I love it. I always go back to, if you really want to know what's going on, you go to, well, and Mr. McKenzie is off TSN, is retiring, but you go to the guys who know. You go to the Ron McLeans and the panel. You go to yourself. You go to a whole whack load of people who've been doing it a long time, who know a heck of a lot more than this guy. I'm just sitting here, I just like the After Hours resonates with me because as a kid I watched it, if I was ever allowed to stay up that late.
Well, that's the problem. We get our audience, we like to say, from guys getting home from bars in the east of the country, gassed, and they'll watch it, or the guy just waking up on the couch who can't find the remote and goes, the heck with it, I'll just watch that. And how many times have we done that, right? You can't find the remote, and so whatever's on, you just stare at. Well, we'll take our audience any way we can get it. But actually, on a more serious note, that show does get, for that hour of the night, it does get very respectable numbers.
Well, and I mean, all it takes is the right guest, somebody, and then an interesting story. I mean, it's the same with anything. You get the right people on there talking. It's awesome. I mean, the storyline goes a long way. You've had. I didn't realize this. I guess maybe I didn't. I just kind of overlooked it. But we talk. I hear you talk a lot about Ryan Reeves, and I'm sure you've, your connection to him, him growing up near, best friends with your kids and near your home, and the different stories there. But the shenanigans he's pulled with you over time has been another thing that has been quite humorous and enjoyable to watch. It's fun to watch from where I sit, and probably a lot of people sit, to watch an interaction happen that just seems like not so, I don't know, right out of a can, to say. Like, it's got some human elements to it, and it just
it's
feels
not your
natural.
it's not your basic walk-off interview with him, certainly, if it's me doing it, because he's like one of our kids. He grew up across this kitty corner to us, and best friends with Bruce and Darcy. He's right between them in age. Darcy was best man at Ryan's wedding, and I was the MC. My payment for that was 2 hockey sticks. And the way I play, I'm still using the first one. I don't think I'll ever break it. So Ryan was very close to us, and if anyone thinking that I'm just going to do your standard, what do you have to do in the third period interview here? It just doesn't work with him. It's like, as I say, talking to one of my kids, and people have probably come to expect something, special, buffoonish maybe when I talk to him, but I'm okay with that, because my rider or qualifier when I talk to Ryan is, don't expect me to adhere to any journalistic principles talking to him, because I saw him grow up and a lot of it in our house, so it's just not possible, and it's okay. I mean, as long as people understand that, I think they get it, and it's fine.
Oh, I think most people get it. I mean, people who don't get it aren't really paying attention, but I don't know. I thoroughly enjoy it when you get things that, as a viewer, you can kind of get into like the trance of like, yeah, here it comes, and there it goes, and all of a sudden you two get talking, and it just, you get what is this going on here? Like, this is enjoyable. No, it's real good. I'm sure it'll be exciting once you're actually in the bubble, if you get a chance, an opportunity to sit and chat with them. I mean, we'll see how they do here over the next couple weeks. But once again, Vegas, right there, like, they've been just a heck of a story since they were formulated. And Reeves has been, the poster child for him. He's been fun to watch. Well,
he's become, I suppose, second only to Marc-Andre Fleury, the most popular player on the Vegas Golden Knights. Ryan is cultivating life after hockey already. He's got 7.5 beer that he's associated with, part ownership, I think, and he's done a number of things in the Vegas community. So he's got a high profile, and plus he can play. That's the thing about Ryan, is that, I know Vancouver fans wouldn't be nearly as complimentary as I'm going to be, but yeah, he's a fourth liner who can make a difference in a game, and he can play a bit. So, he's a valuable player in that way and has been rewarded accordingly with a new contract by Vegas, and he's doing well there. He's an important ingredient on that team.
Listen, Vancouver fans, got time for Vancouver. I'm a diehard Oiler fan, so bear with me. But Vancouver fans would love to have him on the team, right? Like they just had to deal with him for 6 games where they just got, or 7 games, sorry, 7 games where they got, that guy is running around. They got no answer for him, even when they try it. Like, how many teams have an answer for Ryan Reeves? Not too many. Not too many.
No, he's probably the reigning heavyweight champion in the NHL, and you're right. He can change the complexion of a game. Again, Vancouver fans wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but I know that that's how he's viewed in Vegas, and that's why he's still there and will be for a few more years.
Yeah, well, once again on the old Vancouver side, I think they got outshot about 200-1 in the last 3 games. So without their Tendy there standing on his absolute head, it could have been over a heck. But I will give him this. As an Oiler fan, I would have loved to have been in that position and experienced a Game 7 and still got beat. We can't seem to find where we're going. Now, we can go down that rabbit hole a long, long way, but we're going to go to the Crude Master Final 5. Been talking to you now you're laughing that we've been in an hour. Now we're at an hour and a half. So let's go to the Crude Master.
If anybody is still watching, send me an instant message and I'll call an ambulance for you.
Hey, one of the cool things, and I've said this before to a bunch of my guests. One of the cool things, it puts out, on podcasts, they put out statistics on your episodes, and my average listen is about 3 minutes before the end. And the last little bit, I have just like a little segment, and so it means people are listening. They listen to the end. I think it's super cool. I think a lot of people, specifically in my area, we're not. Well, and probably the cities too would be the same way. We commute a lot, and so people are tired of listening to the radio or what they have their ways, right? And to flick something on like this and hear as long as it's entertaining. Now, who knows what people will say about this, Scott? They might have turned it off a while ago, but a lot of them, and I'll hear about it, listen right to the end. So first off, thanks off for coming on. Now let's get to the Crude Master Final 5. 5 questions, short as long as you want to go. I'm not worried about it, so don't feel like you're taking up too much time. On your after hours show, you've talked to a lot of people. If it wasn't just hockey guys, is there one guy that you wish you could have on after hours to sit and pick their brain like we're doing?
Interesting question. I would say Barack Obama.
Interesting. What would you ask him about?
I would ask him what he thinks of the state of U.S. politics. We know that, right? But how we can all get back on the same side of decency, which we seem to have lost, certainly south of the border. It's a very polarized country right now, and it's discouraging to see.
I would say that feels like most of the world right now is very polar. It's just very black and white. It just feels like you're on one side or the other. But once again, Mr. Obama's even got pulled into that, right? Like everybody's been pulled into it. They've been pushed to a side. You can't have. It doesn't seem like you can have a conversation anymore, which is really strange. People don't want to listen to that, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's no time for other people's opinions. It's either you're either right or you're wrong, and it's unfortunate.
You've covered a lot of sports. I mean, you're known for Hockey Night in Canada, but with all the Olympics going on, you've done different things. And I assume at the very, very beginning of your career, you had to do other things than just the NHL. What is maybe one of the sports you've done play-by-play for, or something in your career that most people don't know you did, and you were like, I can't believe I'm about to do play-by-play or broadcast for this?
Well, I'm not strong at play-by-play. I think the only reason I was able to do skiing, alpine skiing at a number of Olympics was, first of all, I was carried by Karen Lee Gartner, the 1992 Olympic gold medalist. And And secondly, because there's only one person on the course at a time, so I really couldn't screw it up. I don't know. I've done all manner of different sports. One that I think back on was the World Canoeing Championships in Montreal, and I prepared diligently and had all my notes on a nice piece of foolscap written in sort of marker, and it rained, and all my notes washed off. I lost every bit of them just before the event started, and I thought this is going to be a disaster. Somehow I was able to bluff my way through that. In the Olympics in Seoul in 1988, the executive producer called me and said, "I need you to go call the final game for Canada basketball in the round robin tomorrow." And I'd never done basketball before, and his attitude was everybody should be ready to do any sport. And Ron Lancaster, the great Ron Lancaster, was the color commentator on basketball that year, and he was really good. So I knew he'd carry me. But when I got there, it was Spain against Canada, and three of the starting five and I knew the Canadians, and three of the starting five on Spain were named Fernandez. So the margin of error was greatly reduced, and I was able to bluff my way through that. So
Fernandez over to Fernandez. Fernandez
yeah,
shoots it.
Exactly.
It's a goal. Well, not
Yeah.
even a goal. It's a
Yeah.
three-pointer.
Yeah. So there have been a few situations like that, but I'm better off doing what I'm doing, which is talking to people and doing in-ring hosting.
How about best piece of advice you could give? Maybe go back to your 20-year-old self, a young guy starting out in broadcasting. What was something you learned along the way that if you could go back and impart that on your 20-year-old self, you'd give?
Shut up and listen. As I said to you earlier, when I got my first job, I was amazed that I was able to get it because I thought I knew everything and couldn't wait to get it out. That was reflected in a lot of the work I did, like the Olympics in Montreal, where I was very proud of myself at minimizing the contribution of someone who'd actually wrestled when we were covering wrestling, right? That was wrong. And over the course of time, I realized that you don't need to every time you speak, you don't need to tell people how smart you are. There's nothing wrong sometimes with just saying what went wrong in the second period, something like that, right? So I like to think that I've, over the years, have become a better broadcaster by the advice that I should have given to myself at the age of 20.
How about your bucket list? What on your career side of things, you've had a very successful career. We've got to go to places and see things most people dream of or wish they could. Or what's one thing that you still want to do?
I want to do the perfect broadcast. I want to get up out of the chair and go, that was perfect, and now I retire undefeated. There really isn't anything. I have been so fortunate to work at 15 Olympics, countless Stanley Cup finals, world championships all over the place. I can't honestly think of one thing that that I would consider to be missing from what I've done in broadcasting. I'm delighted with the way it's gone, and most of all, I'm delighted to still be working, because this is a shrinking industry, and to just have a job these days is a major accomplishment, and I count myself lucky.
If you were, we'll say, sent on assignment to Toronto tomorrow, and you could bring one other broadcaster with you who's going to be your roommate, who would you bring and why?
Oh, my goodness. Well, fortunately, neither the CBC nor Rogers makes us share hotel rooms. I don't know. I'm a big fan of a lot of broadcasters. I marvel at Ron MacLean's ability to be the same person on the air as he is off the air. That's his greatest gift, right? Because I think for most of us in this business, when that red light comes on, you change a little bit. Whether you're wouldn't say nervous, but you just become a little bit more intense, I suppose. The greatest gift you can have in this business, well, Ron has always said, the greatest gift, the key to broadcasting is sincerity. And once you can fake that, you can do anything. But the greatest gift in this business is to be exactly the same person on the air as you are off the air. And that would be him. So I'm a big fan of his. I was a big fan of Dave Hodge, his predecessor on Hockey Night in Canada, because Dave never shied away from an issue or a question back when a lot of other guys weren't doing that. So to name one that I would want to have as a roommate, here's how I would view it. Anybody who would want to be my roommate, I wouldn't want to be their roommate. But the old Groucho Marx, any club that would have me as a member, I wouldn't want to be a member of. That's my answer to that question. Anybody who'd want to room with me, I want nothing to do with.
Well, I really appreciate you hopping on. It's been enjoyable. Best of luck going into the bubble. And we look forward to probably seeing you very shortly on the airwaves. And thanks again.
My pleasure, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, folks, thanks again for joining us today. If you just stumbled on the show and like what you hear, please click subscribe. Remember, every Monday and Wednesday, a new guest will be sitting down to share their story. The Sean Newman Podcast is available for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you find your podcast fix. Until next time.